Good evening, and I, Akshaya, would like to welcome to the 17th episode of Leadership Conversations in the Development Sector. The social impact sector is full of passionate leaders with innovative outlooks on the world's greatest problems. Our leadership conversations focus on the unique insights offered by these leaders as they share their experiences and move the development sector forward. Our host, Go Barefoot, is an interactive web portal dedicated to the social sector. It brings together individuals, NGOs, NPOs, and the CSR arms of organizations with the mandate of creating a one-stop information website for both networking and knowledge sharing. We are supported by Catalyst, an NGO which has been preparing young women for leadership roles to create equality in opportunities and bridge the gender gap. Also, we are supported by Third Sector Partners, India's only executive search firm exclusively for the development sector. Our guest today is one of the leading lights in the development sector. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Vidya Shah, Executive Chairperson, EdelGive Foundation. EdelGive Foundation is an organization set up by Edelweiss Group in 2008 with the aim of funding and building the capacities of grassroots organizations across India. With over 3 decades of rich industry experience, Vidya has channeled EdelGive's structure of giving to include both financial and non-financial support to over 150 grassroots organizations, scaling their budgets, impact, and reach exponentially. She also serves on the boards of various prominent civil society organizations such as Akshaya Patra Foundation, Agastya International Foundation, Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy, Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University, Olympic Gold Quest, Mann Deshi Foundation, and the Indian School of Public Policy. She spent the first 11 years of her career in the field of investment banking with companies like ICICI, Peregrine, and NM Rothschild. She joined Edelweiss in year 2000 and was its chief financial officer until 2007. Vidya holds an MBA degree from IIM Ahmedabad. In conversation with Ms. Shah is Shital Kakkar Mehra, leadership expert and executive presence coach for CEOs. Shital has trained over 75,000 professionals across Asia and has personally coached over 1,000 CXOs in the past 2 decades. She has conducted workshops for diverse organizations across Asia and has been invited as a speaker by leading these schools and professional associations. She's a best-selling author, and her latest best-selling book, Executive Presence: The Poise Formula for Leadership, is India's first research-based formula on this leadership skill. Sheetal is an active philanthropist and social entrepreneur. Over to you, Sheetal. Thank you, Vidya and Sheetal, for joining us today. Over to you, Sheetal.
Thank you, Sakshi. Welcome, Vidya. We look forward to hearing your views. So I'm going to start by asking you my first question. EdelGive works with partner NGOs by providing direct funding, capacity building, and even linking them to funding sources, both public and private. We have seen during the pandemic that the government had to work very closely with both corporate as well as development sector for vaccination drives, as well as building awareness, mask wearing, and all of that. So in your view, what can the governments learn from this sector?
That's a tough question because, I read somewhere recently a senior person in philanthropy saying that the government is the biggest NGO in a sense because it is meant to use its revenues towards the welfare of its citizens. I think one of the things that some of us who've been in the sector for long enough have realized that social issues, social problems are complex. They are interconnected, they are multidimensional, they need multi-stakeholder approaches. Even if you look at the issue of education, it's very easy to say, why don't children go to school? And so how do we build teacher capacity or improve schools? But I think it's very tangled. There are so many issues and the issues are complex, they're nuanced, and they need approach, different people working together, bringing different approaches. And the pandemic was no different. I think the reason we could get rations to people very quickly, we could organize vaccination drives, there was a collective consciousness that got generated in the midst of the pandemic where private sector, government, as well as the civil society organizations came together. I think the one thing that government is government is slow. That's largely because of its own hierarchies, its own structures, and its own method of addressing problems. The one thing the private sector and even civil society organizations can do is private sector understands supply chains, and civil society organizations understand mobilization. They understand how to get people together quickly to solve a problem. And I think that is one thing that I think the private sector as well as civil society organizations brought, that government at some point really needs to think about, is how do you untangle some of the supply chain constraints and bottlenecks that tend to impede the flow of aid, whether it's direct transfers, whether it's food rations, whether it's vaccination to people who are deserving of it. And an example was really in the early days was around medicines, where suddenly when our borders closed, even APIs, which are these active pharma ingredients, got stuck at ports because the government had issued a circular without thinking that there needs to be some opening up of supply chains. So I think these are the things that both the private sector as well as civil society brings that governments can learn from.
Wonderful. Agree with you 100%. And I'm going to just change tracks to another very important element in development, which is that globally the divide between the social and the corporate sector is also breaking. Now, it's very interesting that you started your career with the financial services sector, and after several years of an industrious career, you moved to the social sector. So what are some of the processes that the social sector can learn from the corporate sector, and of course, vice versa?
Yeah. No, I think in fact, I feel there is a lot more that the corporate sector can learn from the social sector, because, out of my 33 years in my career, I've spent nearly half and half half in corporate and half in the social sector. I think the corporate sector brings a certain focus and a certain almost obsession around outcomes. And in their case, it's profits, it's revenues, it's profit margins, it's growth, it's market cap, all of that. And in order to do that, obviously the back end, which is, what in the corporate world, either you call them enterprise functions, like things like, finance and accounts, or governance compliance, risk, understanding of risk, understanding of technology, all of these become very paramount. HR, of course, people development, leadership development. This is the backbone on which a lot of corporate, ambitions, aspirations, goals get achieved. And that mindset around getting these functions to be strong and to be able to partner with business is something that the sector needs to learn from, and that problem in the social sector arises both out of the fact that a lot of our leaders in the social sector come from the social sector. They understand problems, they understand communities, but they don't necessarily understand org building. And it's not that people in the corporate world, grow up, have gone through degrees to understand how to build organizations, but they have people around them. They have processes that enable that growth. Whereas in our sector, the social sector, it needs a lot of consciousness around building the backbone, where it enables programs to get delivered and measured and monitored and improved upon. As far as what the corporate sector can learn, of course, is the long-termness, the patience that comes from the sector, because we know that problems don't get solved in 5 years and 10 years. We have to have a 20, 30-year horizon sometimes to be able to look, because of the interconnectedness, because of the complexity we have around issues that we, battle in the social sector. And I think there's a degree of empathy and an empathetic leadership. There's so many leaders in the sector that really need celebration and being looked upon because of the strengths they brought. And that level of empathy, that level of being able to drive people to do beyond their call of duty, beyond just monetary reward. that is something that the sector really brings, because people here work for beyond money. Money is important, but it's not number one. It's probably number two or number three or number four. And that is something I think the corporate sector needs to learn, from our sector.
So interesting you say that, because empathy was something that was never spoken about as leadership in the corporate sector. But post the pandemic, we are hearing a lot of conversations around authenticity and empathy in the leadership in the corporate sector as well. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more about the fund, your EdelGive. You support women and girls with grassroots leadership and economic independence. So our listeners would love to hear some more about these programs and initiatives.
No, I think personally, my passion has been, thematically has been very much around women and now gender as well. When we started, we focused more on education and livelihoods, but the more we, sort of went deeper into some of the programs that we funded and worked with, we realized that women seem to be at the center of actually solving a lot of problems. Whether it's in education and the role of a mother, not only in ensuring that a child goes to school, is fed, is nutritionally adequate, and is perhaps part of the school management committee or the local panchayat in order to drive change in her community. Similarly, if you look at especially rural communities and agri-based communities, where large parts of labor actually comes from women. So we found that women seem to be at the center, and if we don't look at issues that bother them, or rather stymie them, that do not allow them to do what they want to do, whether it's for their families, for their communities, for their children, then we will never be able to move forward. And I know there's a lot of studies out there about women's role in the economy, GDP growth that is just possible when 50% of the world actually is, brought to the table. Nevertheless, I think if you look at it at a grassroots level, a lot of women want a voice. They want agency. They want to be able to participate. So that's why we started crafting programs. And incidentally, one of our first organizations that we worked with was Mann, Deshi, which was looking at the economic empowerment by looking at financial literacy, women's entrepreneurship, and improving their negotiation and ability to improve their role in their own families by being breadwinners. That is very, very powerful. I strongly believe that women need to work or need to understand what it is to be economically independent, and education alone is not enough. But on the other hand, we do have mindset issues. And those mindsets don't exist only because, we tend to be a patriarchal country, but also because women themselves have certain perceptions about what they can and cannot do. And therefore, building leadership of women at the grassroots is extremely important, because we need to change mindsets of, there's a lot of conversation about changing mindsets of men and boys, but there's an equal conversation about changing mindsets of women to say that there's nothing to actually stop you. And a lot of the, the baggage that we carry about how we've been raised or what we've been taught needs to see a paradigm shift. And therefore, all our programs that we do in women empowerment are focused towards, building access to legal justice, working around issues of violence, working around issues of building grassroots leadership of women. And we've seen enormous success when, through our programs, which have tried to build not only the social and the economic participation of women, but also increasingly the political participation of women. And that is the final, of course, cultural also, but political has become important, as we've seen a lot more women today vote. A lot more women are standing for local government political positions. And that is also an important shift we need to see in our society.
So true that political, the voting also shows some level of empowerment, as well as, of course, working against all the cultural biases, societal prejudices, and all of that. So wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. And a little more about the foundation. That EdelGive Foundation has worked extensively with children's education in India through the EdelGive program. So please share with our listeners your 3 biggest learnings with regards to education, especially during COVID times.
I think the one thing that I've seen over the 15 years, because some of our earliest programs were around education, I think the biggest shift is when we started, there was a lot more focus on building schools and building school infrastructure. I think that has changed. This conversation about, parents not sending children to school has, that doesn't even enter anybody's vocabulary anymore. Today, we're really focusing on how can children learn and learn better. And our focus is on children in government schools. And our largest program is actually in the state of Maharashtra, where we work in 7 of the most, what are called special focus districts in government, Zilla Parishad and government schools. And I think over the 6 years of the program, it's a 10-year program, we're in the 6th year. I think one of the biggest changes we have seen is really around technology. We've spoken a lot, especially in the pandemic, about using online, technology, online access to education. And you've seen this proliferation of edtech organizations in the country and the crazy valuations that they now command. Yeah. But I think as far as the communities we are in, we realize how difficult it is for 70 to 80% of children to access the education online. And therefore, we have to tailor how education has to go to the kids in a way that they can actually access it. So we need to reverse how we provide. Today we say, all we need to do is ensure that it's online and children will access it. And that doesn't happen because we don't have the devices, we don't have the internet access, we don't have mothers and fathers sitting next to children and saying, let me help you learn. So I think one of the biggest learnings is we need to tweak how we provide you or use, this whole language around technology has to change and it has to become more child friendly. The second thing is that the role of teachers cannot be underestimated. Even in the pandemic, we found large number of teachers in the government school system found innovative ways to get to their children because they realized that online doesn't necessarily work. And where teachers took initiative, there it worked extremely well. Yeah. And the third is really, collaboration within government departments, whether it's around pedagogy, whether it's around online access, training teachers to teach online, because we may have for some time to live with a hybrid model, ensuring that parents knew what to do, how to keep their children safe. I think all of these were very interesting ways of ensuring that children don't necessarily have learning loss at levels that will make it difficult for us to get them back into the classroom at age appropriate levels.
True, very true. It was not a level playing field. And, wonderful the work that you have done and a lot of others in this space to bridge the gap as much as possible. My next question is related to technology, which you've already broached. So the role of technology in livelihood, education, and women empowerment, if you would like to add something to that.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part of technology is, there seems to be a single word to describe all kinds of interventions. And I found that in the social sector, we have to break it up. One is technology that improves productivity and enables some level of efficiency, which you must try and use in terms of automating some of your processes if you can, especially around data gathering, if you're that kind of organization that relies a lot on data to make certain conclusions. Similarly, from a reporting perspective, from a monitoring perspective, I think automating a lot of your processes, the larger the organization is, the more important it starts becoming. But in terms of technology for delivering service or services, that is something that, the jury is still out because we still haven't found the right model in which to provide it. So like I said, in education, unless a child has access to a phone, even if it's not a smartphone, even a regular phone, and has reasonable access to the internet, you will always find that some children will be left behind. And children who come from poverty, below poverty level families or near poverty level families will, and that's a large percentage, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So therefore, delivery of service is a problem. However, one of the things that worked reasonably well, for example, which surprised me, was using Zoom and technology platforms like these to convene and to bring women together. So the women's collectives continued to work because, there was some access to technology. So I think we have to still figure out how do you make technology a part of delivery of service, whether it actually can be done, and how do we tweak it to ensure that everybody has access to it.
Very true. Yes, I agree with you. And yes, we should definitely use technology, to take it to the grassroots level, to the rural level. And hopefully in the next few years, we would be speaking about this on a much more bigger platform. Now, it's very interesting that donor profile has changed in the last few years, and COVID somehow accelerated this change. Today, we talk about young philanthropy, we talk about collaborative philanthropy, words that we hadn't heard just a few years ago. So please tell us a little bit more about this.
I think, if you look at all the data, not only in India, but around the world, the extent of younger people sort of engaging in philanthropy has grown exponentially. In India, I think if you look at the stats, corporate philanthropy is growing at about 15-16% per annum. Similarly, foreign funding for various reasons has grown at a slightly slower pace. It's more like 8 or 9% a year. But it's this what is called private philanthropy, which is largely led by individuals and private foundations, which is growing at something like 30% plus. And the reason for that is in a sense is obvious, because the kind of new wealth that has got generated in the last 8 to 10 years in particular has been phenomenal. And there's a greater awareness of the need for philanthropy to step in and sort of play a role in bridging the gap between what markets can't do, or what governments can't do, but what civil society can do, and then to sort of empower, in a sense, or catalyze, their actions through private philanthropy. So I think that awareness is very much there. There is also the awareness around the fact that inequalities have only deepened. The statistics there are just out there for everybody to see, that especially in the pandemic, the inequalities have only grown, which is extremely, it's sad, and it's also very scary at one level. But I think there's another sort of vector that has started coming in, which is climate. And a lot of people who are behind the need to push action on climate change are actually the very young people, right? And I think there's that push that's also coming. And then therefore there is a push largely from European investors on ESG. So you're seeing all of this, and a lot of the funding is getting influenced, especially in the private sector, is getting influenced by whether you are ESG compliant. And I think these different mix of factors has actually created kind of a perfect storm where, we will see a lot more private philanthropic participation even in civil society action, whether it's on climate, whether it's on gender, whether it's on education. I think the only thing that I personally would like to see more of is a balance. Right now, there's a lot of big money coming in, and big money likes to chase big initiatives. But the soul of the civil society in India, and I think the world over, is our grassroots organizations. They tend to be smaller and more community-based, community-oriented. And I think they also need the attention. We saw that attention go away during COVID. A lot of or smaller organizations were deprived of funding. They
funds, yeah.
And I think therefore we need that balance to come in. We should support the big initiatives, but we should also have one eye on smaller orgs that are making that small incremental change year after year in communities.
True. The sector has also changed and evolved in the last couple of decades. We've seen how it is perceived and the kind of talent that it attracts has also changed and evolved. Now, you have a very interesting journey from an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad to the social sector. So my final question to you is, what is your advice to the rising stars of this sector? We have a lot of NGOs, NPOs, as well as crossover candidates who log in to hear leadership conversations in the sector. So what is your advice to the rising stars of this sector?
If I can go by my own experience, I think I actually came into the sector just entirely by, it was just coincidental. It was just fortuitous, right place, right time kind of a thing. I had just begun my new role at EdelGive, looking after a career in investment banking. I wanted to look at very different things. So I went on to build the back end that I was speaking about earlier, which is I was CFO, I was head of HR, head of administration, things that I had not done before. But what I think I really enjoyed was the learning, and all of us who are either new or old in our careers, whatever our careers may be, know that learnability, and you as a coach, Shital, will attest to it, that learnability is the one quality that we keep looking at, right? EQ and learnability. And if you're not able to learn, if you're not able to evolve as a professional, at some point you will reach, your own a glass ceiling that you have created, not that anybody has created that glass ceiling for you. And I think one of the things that the social sector does is engenders that learnability. After I spent a few early years in EdelGive, I think one of the things we had agreed as a founding team was that we would start giving earlier. We would start giving as early as we could once we started making sustainable profit. And that ended up being, in our 7th or 8th year. And I think we started giving larger quantities every year, even before we were listed. And therefore, we were one of the few companies of our size that had started giving long before, the CSR bill came into being. And one of the things that I realized as we started working in the sector and focused specifically on building capacity, we used a lot of the talent from EdelGive to deliver some of these projects, whether it's on, financial planning or building strategy or, cash flow planning, things like that, or HR related project structures, org structures, performance evaluation, etc. And again, a lot of the professionals came back to me and said how much they had learned by being in the sector, how much they'd learned about working in resource-starved environments, how much they'd learned about, near equals, because in the sector, the hierarchies are not so well defined, right? Everybody works together. You just roll up your sleeves and you work. In the sector, you have stalwarts who lead organizations, but are incredibly humble about what they do. And that's something that the corporate sector doesn't necessarily see all the time. So I think when whatever career you are in, whether you are a professional in the private sector, whether you are in civil society, I think just keep honing learnability, and the amount the sector will teach you is incredible. I think there are great qualities of empathy and acceptance. I hate the word tolerance. I call it more embracing, differences and diversity. All of that, but it's also about how do you work and change the way people, can live and thrive in the world, and how you can be just a small, perhaps medium of change. And it brings a lot of humility as well, because everybody says, oh, it's so nice to work, you must be feeling good. It's not about feeling good to be in the sector. It's the fact that by being thoughtful and by being focused, can you really work with people who have the potential to change this country, potential to change how communities are? And I think that is the headiness that sometimes the sector gives you. And we should enjoy it, we should embrace it, and we should really capitalize on the learnability that the sector provides.
Amazing. You speak with so much passion that was mesmerizing. And yes, I agree with you. We have to be a student for life. one has to constantly learn, unlearn, relearn, and all of that. So yes, wonderful, Vidya. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Our first question is from Michelle of Third Sector Partners. So yes, could we have the spotlight on Michelle, please?
Thank you, Shital. And Vidya, it's so wonderful to hear you speak. And I totally agree with Shital. It was mesmerizing, and you speak with so much of passion for the sector. Vidya, my question to you, and I understand that your work at EdelGive Foundation has supported the advancement of women's entrepreneurship across the country. Could you share with us an inspiring example of rural women entrepreneurs who have broken barriers to set up small-scale businesses? And what can we take back from the rural women entrepreneurs?
One of the campaigns we recently did based on a landscape study on women entrepreneurship in India, really, and a lot of the answers are all there. Basically, three things that small women entrepreneurs in particular have, say, difficulty in accessing. One, they have difficulty in accessing financing. They find it more difficult to go to a bank and ask for a loan. Second, they have a great difficulty in accessing markets. How do you go out there? How do you market yourself? How do you, productize? How do you brand? Things like that. And the third is they shy away from being in networks, and women's networks exist. And they somehow, they don't have the time mostly to spend an hour or half an hour or, just working on getting knowledge from other women or their peers. And I think a lot of the work that the campaign has done, the Udyam Sri campaign that we've been running for the last year, it's a multi-stakeholder campaign, working with government, working with civil society organizations, working with women themselves, as well as with industry and industry associations, is try to say, what are the structural barriers we can thus remove? And I think the women that we met along the way, the women entrepreneurs and there's, there's this whole series that Nagma, our CEO, has done, interviewing some of these women entrepreneurs, really, extremely heartening to hear their stories. But there's one or two women that I've personally met during my, my work, who have just amazed me with their talent and with their fearlessness, and that is one thing that I really admire. So there's this one woman who's actually works with, is part of the Mann Deshi system, who's basically into goat insemination. Now, she identified a market opportunity that goats work better in the Mann area of the Satara area of Maharashtra, because they need less water, less fodder, etc. But how do you increase the population of goats? So she actually went and studied with the help of Mann Deshi. She went to veterinary school, learned the process, and today she's created several other entrepreneurs around her, shared her knowledge and built that. And it's amazing to see how she's grown. Or this woman who I met, who was selling food, selling batata vadas around, Bushi Dam. And she was talking, and all the investment she needed was in a handcart, which costs about 10,000 rupees. And how she grew her business. And today she has 3 of those, one manned by herself, one by her husband, and one by her mother-in-law. And when she spoke about mother-in-law, she spoke with a lot of pride that her mother-in-law now works for her. So I think these are the stories that we have of women, and we need more of these stories out to provide, the kind of motivation and the kind of role model, that role models that these women can be for other women is very, very important.
Amazing. This is so inspiring to hear, and I'm sure we can go on and on hearing so many wonderful stories. We have another question from Shweta of Catalyst. So could we have the spotlight on Shweta, please?
Thank you so much. Thanks, Shital. And really a great experience listening to Vidya. Vidya, my question is also related to women. I work with Catalyst and we work with young women. I wanted to know, you were talking about some success stories. So what were the challenges that actually you faced, when you were talking about in terms of changing the mindset of women? What were the challenges? How did you overcome? Was there any community support? How did you go about it?
So all our work, of course, is through our NGO partners, right? So I cannot claim any credit for the actual change on the ground. So whether the stories of the two women I just shared, all the work is by Mann, Deshi. All we do is stand in support of organizations like that. And therefore, some of the stories I'll share are really, I can claim no credit whatsoever for any of this. But Coro is another brilliant organization that works at building grassroots leadership, and particularly focused, the program that we funded was actually a single women's program in Marathwada and the Vidarbha areas of Maharashtra. And there the challenge was that for some reason, there seems to be an inordinate number of what we call single women, who could be women who are single, have chosen to be single, or are separated or divorced, or have sometimes been abandoned by their husbands. And in some cases, as the women have proudly said, abandoned their husbands. So I think these women were really grappling. The biggest issue they had was with property rights, because one, when they were single, their access to what should be rightfully their property as well, a share in the house, a share in the land, was deprived. They were deprived of it. And every time they went to the local tehsildar and tried to, negotiate and say, no, this is under the law, I am an equal, I have an equal share. Just the training around what to say, understanding of the law, understanding of how do you negotiate, how do you go again and again to the office. The first time the guy will throw you out and say, who are you, why did you come here? But when you go from a space of knowing what you want, knowing the law, being strong in your understanding of it, and then being persistent around it, has made remarkable changes in that community, where a lot of women have finally got access to their dead husband's property, and it's mainly because they have children, they need their own, they need to survive themselves. And I think that has now progressed into building voice and agency in a whole set of other things, such as, for example, I think Mann Deshi has the highest number of women who stand for panchayat elections. Last count, I think there were over 100 panchayat representatives in the few districts that they worked. And this is not about political affiliation. This is about political participation. Similarly, things like, widow never felt that she could continue to wear a bindi or a mangalsutra because there was, a social taboo. And to say who writes these rules. If you want to wear a bindi, it's up to you to wear a bindi. So I think a lot of this comes from bringing women together, bringing, giving them the right understanding of what knowledge of self is, what they are, who they are, and then, building on that to build agency and to build voice.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting. We can go on and on. We have just time constraints, so we've had to stop. But thank you, Vidya. It's been very inspiring hearing you, as well as all the wonderful stories that you have shared, and the wonderful initiatives, especially when it comes to women leadership and empowerment. On that note, I would like to thank you, as well as a big thank you to our audience for listening in today. And thank you so much. And we look forward to staying connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Shital. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.